Hello everyone and welcome to Historical Crime Chronicles. I'm your host, Alan G. If you like what you see, hit like, subscribe, and then hit the bell to let you know that you'll be notified for any future episodes. Ever since the summer of 1977, the population of Oklahoma has been struggling to find answers to a heinous crime that occurred almost 50 years ago. 3 young girls were brutally attacked and murdered for no apparent reason whatsoever. What was supposed to be a joyous celebration of summer turned into a nightmare for 3 families whose repercussions still reverberated to the present day. On the evening of June 12, 1977, the storm skies opened and heavy rain descended over Locust Grove, Oklahoma. Nearby, down a narrow dirt road, lined with looming trees and 400 acres of dense woods, young Girl Scouts rushed inside their tents. Instead of their previously planned activities, the girls were sent back to their tents after dinner to write letters home. It was their first night at Camp Scott, having been bussed in earlier that day for their 2-week session of summer camp. On that dreary evening, 8-year-old Lori Lee Farmer, 9-year-old Michelle Heather Goose, and 10-year-old Doris Denise Milner returned to their cabin in the Kiowa unit. Their tent, number 8, was the last in the semicircle and the furthest away from the counselor's tent, over 80 yards away. The tents, though made to look like cabins, were wooden platforms with 4 cots, no lights, and a large flap serving as the door. Anyone could get in, anyone could get out. With their 4th roommate set to arrive the following night due to a scheduling error, the trio got situated in their unit and wrote letters back home. Lori Farmer, a bright little girl who was said to be mature beyond her years and the youngest Girl Scout at camp that week, was excited to write home to her family in Tulsa. She told her loved ones about her 2 new friends and roommates. Her father, Dr. Charles Farmer, had been the emergency room director at Tulsa's St. John's Medical Center. No stranger to Camp Scott, having attended the camp the year prior, Michelle Goose was a shy, athletic girl with a love for plants. In fact, before leaving her home in Broken Arrow, her mother, George Ann, told a newspaper that Michelle insisted she take care of her plants while she was away at camp. African violets were one of her favorites. Having sold enough Girl Scout cookies to be able to attend the camp with her friends, Denise Milner had been excited about going to camp. She was a straight-A student and had already been admitted into a Tulsa school that was created for exceptionally bright students. However, at the last minute, her friends backed out and Denise reluctantly went alone to camp. She was not keen on the idea of leaving her mom Betty and her 5-year-old sister. On the bus, Denise cried about having to leave. After the trio finished their letters, the girls gathered for story time before heading to bed. During story time, Denise was again upset and asked to call her mom. One of the Kiowa counselors, a young woman named Dee Elder, comforted Denise. After some convincing, Denise agreed she would wait and call her mom the next day. Meanwhile, as the girls were winding down for the evening and the first day of camp was ending, a counselor in the Comanche unit stared out into the night. In the darkness, through the dense trees, movement caught her eye. A dim light was moving through the woods toward the Kiowa unit. As with any camp, the first nights are always loud. Excited campers enjoyed their newfound freedom with their friends away from their parents. Around midnight, Counselor Carla Wilhite heard some campers giggling outside near the latrine. She woke up, got the girls, then escorted them back to their beds. Again, at 1:30 a.m., Wilhite was awakened by girls giggling in Tent 6. From the door of her tent, Wilhite shone a flashlight toward their tent and hollered for them to go to sleep. Then Wilhite and fellow counselor D. Elder walked over to the Tent 6 to get the girls to quiet down. From the darkness, behind Tents 1 and 2, Wilhite heard a low, guttural sound, or a moaning coming from the woods. Though they assumed it was an animal, when Wilhite went to investigate and shone her flashlight in the direction of the noise, the sound stopped. She turned around and started going back to her tent. As soon as she did that, with the light not being shined in that direction anymore, the sound started back up. So she turned around a second time and started walking back that direction. And as she shone the flashlight in that direction again, the sound stopped again. Wilhite would say later that when she was back in her tent trying to fall asleep, she could still hear the sound. Around the same time, a camper in Tent 7 saw a light approaching the tent. Suddenly, the light flooded the tent and a male figure stood in the entryway. Just as quickly as he appeared, he disappeared into the darkness, closing the flap behind him. One camper said they heard a scream in the night, and another camper said they heard someone crying for their mama. The next morning, the sun rose on another day at Camp Scott. Wilhite woke early, around 6 a.m., to get a shower before the other campers woke up. As she headed out of her tent, she spotted what appeared to be sleeping bags a little away from her tent. When she approached, she realized it was 3 sleeping bags sprawled across the ground. 2 of the sleeping bags were zipped closed. 1 was open. Inside was Doris Milner's body. Leroy Farmer and Michelle Goose were the others. Immediately, the news of the brutal murders of the 3 little girls spread like wildfire. Not only had a monster snuck into the camp and done something so atrocious that it haunts Oklahoma to this day, but there was still a camp full of girls. Camp officials, including the camp directors Richard and Barbara Day, frantically tried to figure out their next move. Little did they know that day, June 13, 1977, after nearly 50 years, Camp Scott would never reopen its doors. Around 10 that morning, and without any explanation to the other campers, the camp was evacuated and the girls were bused back to Tulsa. They were met by their worried parents who hoped and prayed their daughters would step off the bus from camp, a camp they had trusted to keep their daughters safe. How had this happened? How had they let this happen? Who was responsible? While chaos ensued among parents and the Magic Empire Council of Girl Scouts, an investigation needed to be conducted fast. The Mays County Sheriff, Glenn Pete Weaver, was assigned to the case. Weaver had served from 1961 to 1971, then was reelected in 1973 and would hold the position until 1981. Alongside Weaver was District Attorney Sid Wise, who immediately was at the forefront of the investigation. In fact, it would later become known that Wise had made a book deal with a local reporter in exchange for information. Predictably, this information sparked controversy. Upon arrival, investigators were faced with a gruesome scene. The bodies of the 3 little girls had been found roughly 150 yards from their tent on the side of a trail, along with their sleeping bags. The trail ran alongside of the Kiowa unit, which was positioned in a semicircle tucked in the furthest left part of Camp Scott. Nearest the trail was the counselor's tent, or Tent 1. Then, the campers' tents proceeded in a semicircle away from the counselors, ending with Tent 8, the victim's tent, which was over 80 yards from the counselor's tent. The view was obstructed by the showers. The trail that passed the Kiowa unit also led to the back gate of the camp. Through the main gate and the back gate of the camp were locked. The gate itself was not a challenging obstacle. Around 11 p.m., the front gate was locked, but was left unguarded during the night, as well as the side gate near the Kiowa unit. Plus, there was no fence around the perimeter of the camp. So again, anyone could get in, and anyone could get out. Along with the horrific scene, Several pieces of evidence were found by detectives in the hours following their arrival at Camp Scott. Duct tape had been used on the little girls, and near the bodies, a roll of duct tape had been found. Also near the bodies were rope, a pair of women's glasses and a glasses case, and a red flashlight. On June 16th, the medical examiner would announce the 3 girls had not been raped, though they were sexually molested. The flashlight itself had been manipulated in more ways than one. First, the tape had been placed over the lens to dull the light. When turned on, just one small beam of light escaped the flashlight. Additionally, the newspaper had been jammed inside the flashlight to keep the batteries from rattling against the plastic interior. The paper found was the April 17, 1977 edition of the Tulsa World, pages 5 through 12, section C. This would become important later, as well as the women's eyeglasses. Officers entered Tent 8, where another grisly scene waited inside. Blood was found on the tent flap, parts of the floor, and mattresses, and parts of the tent itself were broken. A shoe print was found in the blood on the floor. One of the only places authorities couldn't find blood was on the cot on the right side of the tent. Near the perimeter of the camp, close to the fence line, authorities found a crowbar and beer bottles. In the days following the murders, the investigation would lead authorities to various locations, including several nearby caves and a recently burglarized ranch. Schroff Ranch was owned by Jack Schroff and was located within a mile of the camp. Schroff told authorities that food was stolen from his home, along with tape, beer, and rope. The rope was similar to that found near the bodies. To the naked eye, a passerby may never notice the caves located near Camp Scott. However, those familiar with the area or even experienced hunters would know that there were 3 caves surrounding the camp. After searching the caves, investigators found grocery items, newspapers from the same edition of the Tulsa World, 2 photographs, and duct tape matching the kind found on the girls' bodies. It was evident to authorities that someone had been hiding out inside the darkness of the caves. Further proof was a note written on a cave wall. "The killer was here. Bye-bye, fools." Soon after his initial investigation, Sheriff Weaver already had some working theories in mind. Namely, Weaver told the media that he was already favoring a theory that one person, a man, was responsible for the murders. Even more compelling, the photographs found in the cave may have been developed by a man who served time in Granite Reformatory. That man, Gene Leroy Hart, became the prime suspect. Gene Leroy Hart was born in Locust Grove, Oklahoma in November 1943. Growing up, Hart was recognized in the area for being a talented football player. He was a decent athlete and had some great performances, especially during his senior year of high school. Hart was well known to locals as a stellar athlete and a football player. But Hart was more well known to authorities for his deviant tendencies and criminal behavior. In June of 1966, Hart deviated from his day-to-day routine and instead decided to launch his career as a criminal. Outside of a Tulsa nightclub, Hart abducted 2 young pregnant women from the parking lot and drove them to Mays County. There, he would brutally rape and sodomize the 2 women. It is important to note that both of the victims wore eyeglasses. Even more important, both women survived. A fellow inmate of Hart's would later tell authorities that Hart had poor eyesight and needed glasses. However, instead of going to see an eye doctor, Hart developed a habit of stealing glasses. Didn't matter if they were men's or women's glasses. It didn't matter whether they were prescription glasses or not. He just had a thing for stealing glasses wherever he went. Hart was later caught and charged with rape and kidnapping. Just a few months later, he was released on parole. This is when he started his career as a burglar, breaking into the homes while the owners were home and asleep. However, this crime spree is difficult to follow because his first 3 robberies were not reported to the police. In fact, it wasn't until his 4th burglary at the home of a Tulsa police officer that his crimes came to light. He had a violent sexual history, according to Sheriff Weaver. Eventually, Hart was convicted on 4 counts of burglary for these crimes. Because he was on parole for rape and kidnapping charges, the court served him consecutive sentences of roughly 90 years. He was facing approximately 350 years of prison time. In 1973, after being returned to Mays County Jail for a hearing at the Mays County Court, Hart escaped but was quickly caught by police. Authorities returned him to the Mays County Jail, where he escaped again. This time, it would take police longer to catch Hart. At the time of his escapes, Pete Weaver was the Mays County Sheriff. As the investigation was underway into what monster murdered 3 innocent girls, and with the evidence pointing to Hart, Weaver and law enforcement began their urgent search to get Hart back behind bars. Throughout the search for Hart, authorities would contradict each other several times. In one instance, Weaver told the media the murder weapon had been found. When Wise and OSBI agents spoke to the press later, they said they had no idea what Weaver had been talking about. An ominous threat seemed to follow the case as well. 3 tracking dogs were brought in by investigators to assist in the search. It is rumored that a local medicine man placed a curse on the tracking dogs and stated they would die. Though it may be pure happenstance, the prediction was relatively accurate. 1 dog died from exhaustion, and another ran out into traffic and was hit by a car. Only 1 dog survived. The manhunt would take approximately 10 months, when Hart was apprehended on April 6, 1978. Authorities found him hiding at a residence in Cookson Hills, with some help from an informant. A team of OSBI agents arrested Hart at a residence located 45 miles from Camp Scott. To make things even more challenging for investigators, Hart was from the area, and as a result, he had family and friends. Because of this, he had a vast group of staunch supporters. There was talk early on in the legal proceedings to have his case moved to a different venue. From Gene Leroy Hart's perspective, the best place for him to have that trial was in Mays County. The trial itself took several days and drew both local and national attention. The courtroom was packed and highly secure. Testimony revealed Hart was a suspect early on. The trial also exposed previous threats at the camp leading up to the summer session, including the slashed tent flap, various burglaries, and a note threatening the incoming campers. These threats had previously not been disclosed by the camp, though they had been aware of the situation prior to summer camp. Though the trial would reveal surprising information to the public, no one could prepare for the outcome of the trial. At the end of March 1979, after brief deliberation from the jury, Hart was acquitted of the murders of Lori Farmer, Denise Milner, and Michelle Goose, though Hart promptly returned to the state penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma, to serve the remainder of his 350-year prison sentence. After just a few months in prison, Hart died of a heart attack while serving his time, taking his secrets with him to the grave. In the decades following this heinous crime, speculation and theories surrounded the Girl Scout murders. Some theories carried weight, some theories were unsubstantiated and untrue. Camp Scott was never reopened after that fateful day, yet the horror that took place on the decrepit campground haunts its vacant structures. However, lingering questions remain nearly 45 years later. Was Gene Leroy Hart the killer? If so, did he act alone? In 1996, Ted LaTurner, a private investigator who looked into the case, got a motion approved that had the Mays County grand jury take a look at some of the leads he had found. In addition, LaTurner said none of the suspects were Hart. Though the witness would later redact their statement and the theory was widely discredited by authorities, it wasn't entirely unbelievable. The statement named Sonny James, Frank Justice, and Bill Stevens as the suspects, all of whom had substantial run-ins with the law.
Additionally, they were all rumored to have ties to Hart. Arguably, one of the most compelling incidents occurred with Stevens, an ex-con. On the morning of the murders, Stevens was reportedly seen near Camp Scott at a cafe with blood on his boots. Witnesses said he acted very strangely, and within months of the murders, Stevens was arrested on similar rape and kidnapping charges. Then, during the Hart trial, an Okmulgee woman testified that the flashlight found at the crime scene had belonged to Stevens. However, the OSBI told those Stevens was named at the trial, the DNA proved not to be a match. Interestingly enough, Frank Justice was the uncle of Sonny James. Justice had been arrested more than a dozen times and was said to have been evasive when he was questioned about the murders. Justice was also reportedly an acquaintance with Hart and had claimed to have seen the writing on the cave wall. Meanwhile, James asked for an attorney when questioned by OSBI agents about the murders and was later convicted of another murder in 1984. However, despite all the theories, rumors, and tales that have been passed down over the years, the only person who has ever been formally charged with the Girl Scout murders was Gene Leroy Hart. To this day, people still question if he committed this atrocity on his own. In 1989, the OSBI submitted a sample to the FBI lab for testing. Because of degradation, they were unable to get a profile, but did obtain a partial DNA profile. The DNA sample was a semen stain found on a pillowcase inside Michelle Goose's sleeping bag. Authorities were unable to exclude Hart as a contributor. The evidence obtained by the OSBI has never excluded Hart, and to this day, the OSBI says, in addition to not being able to exclude Hart, the evidence does not point to anyone else. Over the years, Mother Nature took hold of the abandoned camp and reclaimed what was hers. Hidden beneath the blanket of dense trees, the camp is quiet now. The laughter of young campers has disappeared with the Oklahoma wind. Yet, the memory of Lori Farmer, Denise Milner, and Michelle Goose lives on, their families having ensured they are never forgotten. If you liked what we showed you, hit like, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you'll be notified of any future episodes. Also, if you want to contribute to us, we're on Pour Me a Cup of Coffee and PayPal. You'll find the links on the page. Until next time, from Historical Crimes Chronicle.